Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm the designer behind KT and the Squid. Welcome to week 2 of the Leudinghause crochet along. Hopefully you guys were able to get your gauge figured out and you got all your yarn, so you're good to go, so we can actually get started on making our cardigan. So this week we're going to make the body. And the body, it's a little deceiving because it looks like it's a little bit bigger than it is, but it's not that big. So I'm going to show you some clips of me actually making this sweater. There's a few things you need to know. So first, I'm making size small. So I don't actually say the stitch counts. What you will need to do is either go into your pattern if you purchased it on Ravelry, or you will need to go to the blog post to find the actual stitch counts that you need for your size. Next, when I recorded this, I did it before the pattern was tested and before it was tech edited. There are a few numbers that I say that were actually off, so I will make note of that. So don't go off of what I'm saying. Basically, I'm just showing you the process. So what we'll do is we'll start on the bottom with a row of foundation single crochets, and then we'll work the bottom, and then we'll split for the sleeves, and then we'll seam together the shoulders. So by the end of this week, you're actually going to have something that looks like a little vest. So for this week, you will need the hook size that you settled on for your gauge swatch, and then you'll need a few skeins of yarn. So grab your hook and your yarn and let's get started. Row 1 of the bottom of our cardigan says FSC, and then there's a list of numbers. I'm making size small, so I'm starting with 88. Now, if you don't remember how to make a foundation single crochet, go back to last week and take a look at the gauge swatch video where I showed you how to make the foundation single crochet. Like I said, this is the first row and it looks a little funny. You'll notice that it's kind of wants to curl up on itself. These are just stitch markers. I've used scrap pieces of yarn because I don't like to count. So while I'm making my foundation single crochet, I just make a whole bunch of stitches and then I go back and count, and every 10 stitches I put a scrap piece of yarn. So that marks every 10 stitches, so I know when I have 8, I have 80 stitches, and then I just add 8 more, and that gave me 88. For row 2, I'm going to go ahead and remove these stitch markers, but I'm going to hang on to a couple of them because I'm going to show you how to use these for row 2 to make it a little bit easier. I don't know about you, but I have a husband and kids, and sometimes they walk in while I'm crocheting and they don't realize that I'm counting, and they'll talk to me or ask me a question, and I forget if I'm on stitch number 13 or 14, and then I have to go back and count them all again. I use stitch markers so that that doesn't happen. So let's go ahead and look at row 2. It has a whole bunch of different instructions. I'm just going to break it down. We'll start with the first little instruction here. It says to chain 1. And really important, remember, do not count this chain as a stitch. And then it says 2 extended single crochet in the first stitch. So I'll go ahead and do that here. And now this next set of instructions says extended single crochet in the next, and then there's a list of numbers. I'm doing size small, so I have 29 stitches. And this is where my stitch marker comes in handy. I'm going to go ahead and mark 29 stitches and place a stitch marker. That way I know when I get there I can just stop and go on to the next set of instructions, and I don't have to count while I'm working. Not to bore you with my counting, I would have had it counted 29, and this is my 29th stitch. So I'll go ahead and place my stitch marker there. Let's look at this next set of instructions. It says, in parentheses, chain 1, skip 1, extended single crochet in the next. And then it says to do that 15 times. Chain 1, skip 1 is over 1 stitch. Extended single crochet in the next is over another stitch. So that little set of instructions in the parentheses is over 2 stitches. So if I do that 15 times, that's going to be over 30 stitches. So I'm going to grab another stitch marker. I'm going to count another 30 from this stitch marker, and I'm going to place one more stitch marker. And then our next set of instructions says extended single crochet in each of the remaining stitches, extended single crochet one more time in the last extended single crochet. So we don't need any more stitch markers for that. We're good to go. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go back, and I'm going to work one extended single crochet until I get to this first stitch marker. Here I am to my first stitch marker. I know that's stitch number 29, so I can go ahead and work one more extended single crochet, take that out. Now it says to chain one, skip one, extended single crochet in the next. So chain one, skip one, extended single crochet in the next. Chain one, skip one, extended single crochet in the next. And I'm going to go ahead and keep doing that until I get to my next stitch marker. So I've made it to the next stitch marker, and I'll go ahead and finish the last set of instructions and extended single crochet in each of the remaining stitches. So I'll go ahead and go all the way to the end, and I can remove this too. So I work to the last stitch, and then it says extended single crochet one more time into the last stitch. So we end up with 2 stitches in this last stitch. So now what you want to do is count all your stitches to make sure you have the right amount of stitches. And one quick note, each of these chains, when you chained one and skipped one, each of these chains will count as a stitch. So remember to include those in your stitch count. So if you've counted your stitches and everything is good, you can move on to row 3, which says to chain one and turn, and work 2 extended single crochets into this first stitch. And this next set of instructions might be a little confusing when you first read it, so you might have to read it a couple times. So basically it's telling me to work 1 extended single crochet in each stitch until I get to the second single crochet before the chain 1 stitch. So here's the first one before the chain 1 stitch, and here's the second one before the chain 1 stitch. So I want to work to that extended single crochet. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I worked up into the second single crochet before the chain 1 stitch. So again, here's the first extended single crochet before the chain 1 stitch, and then here's the second, and I've worked into that. So I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to skip that extended single crochet, and then I will work an extended single crochet into the chain 1 stitch. And we're going to do that across this entire section to the last chain 1 space, which is right here. So again, I'll chain 1 and then work into the chain 1 space. Now it's really important, it can get confusing. You see this V right here? That's actually our extended single crochet. And you want to make sure to skip that, but go into the chain 1 space right here next to it. So that's right here. Chain 1, skip the next extended single crochet, and work into the next chain 1 space. So I'll continue to do that until I get to the last chain 1 space. And as you can see, our mesh pattern that'll be on the back of our cardigan is starting to appear. I worked the last repeat into the last chain 1 space. And now it says extended single crochet in each of the remaining single crochets, extended single crochet one more time in the last extended single crochet. So just like we did for the last row. So I will work 1 extended single crochet into each stitch to the end. So So I've made it to the end, and I went ahead and did my second extended single crochet in this last stitch here. Now you'll go and you'll count all your stitches to make sure everything is good. Basically all you did was added 2 stitches from the previous row. And then if that's all good, you can move on to the next set of instructions, which says to repeat row 3 until you have 10 total rows. It's really important. It says 10 total rows, not 10 more rows. So here I have 3 total rows, which means I'm going to add 7 more rows to this. And it's really important that you don't forget to count this first foundation row. That also counts in your 10 total rows. At the end of each row, you will want to stop and count to make sure you have the right amount of stitches. Basically, you're adding 2 stitches each row. So then you will end with the amount of stitches that it says in your pattern. Again, I'm doing size small, so by the time I get to 10 total rows, I should have 106 stitches. So here I've repeated row 3 until I have 10 total rows, and it'll look like this. So now I can move on to row 11, which basically we're going to just stop increasing and only work 1 extended single crochet on the ends. So it says chain 1 turn, extended single crochet in each extended single crochet to the second extended single crochet before the first chain 1 space. So this is a lot like the last rows that we worked. So you'll go ahead and work to the second extended single crochet before the chain 1 space, just like before. And just like the previous rows, we're going to chain 1, skip the extended single crochet and extended single crochet into the next chain 1 space. And you'll repeat that until you get to the last chain 1 space. So here I am at the last chain 1 space. So next you're going to extended single crochet in each of the remaining extended single crochets. So we're going to go all the way to the end, and remember there's no extra extended single crochet at the end. We've ended our increasing. So here I've finished row 11 of my bottom. The next set of instructions says to repeat row 11 until you have 48 total rows. Again, that's 48 total rows, not 48 more rows. And don't forget this first row when you're counting all your rows. Also, I would periodically stop and check to make sure you have the right amount of stitches, because next when we work the fronts and the back, that stitch count is going to be really important to make sure everything lines up correctly. It's really easy in this mesh section to kind of miss a stitch or add an extra stitch in here somewhere, so do make sure to double check that. So as you're working your bottom, you will eventually come to a spot where you need to add a new skein. So I'm going to show you that real quick here. The way I like to add a new piece of yarn is I work up to the last step of a stitch, and then I just grab my new yarn, I wrap it around my hook and pull it through, and then I'll just keep working according to my pattern. And that's really the best way I've found to do it. You'll notice I didn't tie any knots, I didn't join with a slip stitch. I don't like to add any kind of knots into my garments. And you'll notice it also leaves a little bit of a loose loop there. That's easy to fix. All you have to do is pull your yarn, make it nice and even, and then when you weave in those ends, you can make it even more even. Also, if you come across a knot in your yarn, which I did down here, don't work over the knot. Cut it out and join it just like I did. You never really know how secure these knots are going to be, so you'll want to cut it out. And you'll also notice that I do not like to weave in my ends until the very end. The reason being, when we washed our gauge swatch, you notice how much it it changed, and even your gauge might change a little bit too. My gauge changed. So if I go and I weave in my ends right now and then I go and block it and my gauge changes, then it's going to do this. It's going to pucker and I'm going to have a weird looking spot in my garment. So I wait until I have washed and blocked, and that weaving in the ends is the very last thing I do. So once you've finished row 48, it'll look something like this. So here I am right where we left off last. We're going to work the first front, the back, and then the second front. Just a couple notes. The reason I didn't call it the left or the right front is because this fabric is reversible, so it'll depend if it's the right or the left when you get up to the shoulders and you decide what side you want to be your right or your wrong side. It really doesn't matter. Also, I made it easy that way. If you're right or left-handed, it doesn't matter either way. So row 1 of our first front says to chain 1, 2, extended single crochet in the first, and then it has a list of numbers, so you'll have to reference your pattern to know how many extended single crochets to work. I'm doing size small and it says 17, so I will work 17 extended single crochets. So I'll chain 1, turn, and I went ahead and counted 17 stitches across, and I put my stitch marker. So I'm just going to work 1 stitch until I get to that stitch marker. So here I am at my stitch marker. I'll go ahead and take that out, and I know that that's 17 stitches. So row 2 says to chain 1, turn, extended single crochet in the first stitch, skip 1 stitch, extended single crochet in each of the remaining stitches across. So basically this is just a decrease. We're going to start working, this will be the inside of our armhole, and so it's going to start to decrease a little, and then you'll start working straight for a number of rows. So I'm going to chain 1, and I'll turn here. So extended single crochet in the first. Now I'm going to skip 1 and then work 1 stitch in each of the remaining stitches. So here's the end of row 2. You can see it starts to decrease in a little bit there. So do make sure you stop and count to make sure you have the right amount of stitches that matches up for the size that you're making. So now moving on, if you're making size extra small, you're going to go ahead and move on to where it says all sizes. If you're making any other size, move on to row 3, which says to chain 1 and turn, extended single crochet in each stitch until 2 stitches remain, skip 1 stitch, extended single crochet in the last. So basically that's just another decrease on the same side that you decreased before. So I'm going to extended single crochet in each stitch until I have 2 stitches remaining. I have 2 stitches remaining, so I'll skip 1 and I'll extended single crochet in the last. So now from here it'll say to repeat the last 2 rows X amount of times, so you'll have to check according to the size that you're making. So I'm making small, it says repeat rows 2 and 3 until you have 5 total rows. So again, it says total rows, not more rows. So I have 3 total rows here. That means that I'm just going to add 2 more decreasing rows. Again, if you're working size extra small, you'll move on to the next step. Right here I've finished my 5 total rows, and then I counted to make sure I had the right amount of stitches. So again, if you're on size extra small, you just repeat it, you just stopped at row 2, and then you'll move on to the next row. And if you're working on a different size, make sure that you repeated rows 2 and 3 until you have the right amount of rows. Also note, if you are working on size 2X, your hook will be on the other side here because you did 14 total rows, which is an even number. So you'll hook your hook, if it's over on this side, don't worry if you're working size 2X, that one's different. So now we'll move on to the next row, which says to chain 1, turn, extended single crochet in each stitch across. So, and then it says to repeat that next row, the one I just read, until you have, and then it has a list of total rows, so size small. I'll repeat that until I have 21 rows. So basically, we're just gonna work straight until we have the right amount of rows. Here I have my finished first front. So I worked 5 decrease rows, and then I kept working until I had 21 total rows. So make sure you have the right amount of rows according to the size you're making. Also note, because I have 21 total rows, which is an odd number, if you're working one of the sizes that has an even number of rows, your hook will be on this side. So if your hook is on that side and you were supposed to do an even number of rows, then you're good to go. So now we're going to fasten off. And I like to secure with just a little chain. And then we'll start the back. So we'll come down here. It says to return to the last row of the bottom, which this is the last row of our bottom. And then it says skip 4 stitches and join to the next unworked stitch. So here we'll go from skip 4 stitches from the front. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll join to the next stitch. So now for row 1, it says to chain 1 extended single crochet in each extended single crochet to the second extended single crochet before the first chain 1 space. So this is just basically like when we were working the bottom. So we're going to extended single crochet until we get to this stitch. Then we'll chain 1 and we'll skip the extended single crochet into the next chain 1 space. And you'll do that across until you get to the last chain 1 space. And then it says to extended single crochet in the next 17. So again, I'm going to go ahead and use my stitch marker. I'll count off 17. So again, I'm working size small, which is 17. So check your pattern to make sure how many you're supposed to work into. So I'll mark off to the 17th stitch and I'll place a stitch marker there. So now that I've marked my stitch, I'm going to go ahead and work extended single crochets until I get to 2 stitches before the chain 1 space, and then I'll work my mesh pattern, and then I'll work extended single crochets until I get to my stitch marker here. So here I've completed that first row of the back and I made it to my stitch marker, so I'll go ahead and take that out. One thing I did forget to say is that this first extended single crochet of the row does go into that same stitch that you joined into. So row 2 says to chain 1 and turn, extended single crochet in the first, skip 1 stitch, extended single crochet until you come to the second extended single crochet before the first chain 1 space. So basically we're decreasing on this side and then we're going to continue in pattern, and then we'll work across and then we'll do another decrease on this side, basically mirroring what we did over here on our first front. So we'll decrease and then work straight. So I've completed row 2, which was basically working in the pattern we've been working, and a decrease on each side. So if you're working size small or size extra small, you'll move on to where it says all sizes and work the next row, and you'll start working straight like you did for your first front. If you're working any of the other sizes, you'll repeat row 2 until you have the total number of rows that the pattern says. And then you'll work straight, again mirroring what we did over here on our first front. So here I've finished my back. I did all my decreasing and then I worked straight, so I have a total of 21 rows, which is what size small calls for. And make sure to go back and check your pattern and make sure you have the right amount of rows and stitches for the size that you're making. I also want to note to make sure and count your stitches as often as you can. I realized when I was almost done, I was at row 19 or something, that I had forgotten a decrease down here somewhere, so I had to rip the whole thing out and basically start it all over. So make sure you're counting as frequently as you can so you don't have to rip out so much in case you mess up. Then I went ahead and I did my second front right here. I didn't want to bore you with all the stitching, so I just finished it, and basically all we're going to do is mirror what we did at the first front. So you're going to skip your 4 stitches like you did over here when you did your back, and you'll join, and then you'll work the same amount of decrease rows, and then you'll work straight for your total amount of rows. So make sure before you start seaming, which we'll do next, take a little bit of time, make sure you have the right amount of rows and the right amount of stitches so that everything lines up the way it's supposed to. So next, what we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to seam our shoulders. So this is kind of fun because this piece of fabric is going to start to look like an actual garment. So like I said before, it doesn't matter what side is your right side or wrong side at this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this my right side, and then this will be my wrong side. And that's just because it happens to be the way it's laying on my board here. So we're going to take this front and fold it over. And this is also a good way to make sure everything's lining up correctly. And then we're going to take this front and fold it over. And you'll notice how this works out, that our fronts are covering everything except for this mesh pattern. So that's how you'll know everything's lining up the way it's supposed to be. So next, we're going to go ahead and seam these shoulders. This shoulder seam is going to be nice and simple. All we're going to do is work a row of slip stitches holding our front and our backs together. So I think a slip stitch is nice and sturdy. That's why I like to use it on my shoulder seams. If maybe you made a larger size or a heavier yarn and you're worried about the weight of your sweater, you could go ahead and work a single crochet here. Because remember, this seam is basically what's holding up our entire cardigan, so you want it to be nice and sturdy. But for this yarn, I think really a slip stitch is just sturdy enough. So we're going to go through our front and our backs, the last stitch of both the front and the back. See, I went through both stitches there. And you'll join with the yarn. And then, like I said, you'll just slip stitch all the way across, going into the last stitch of your front and the last stitch of your back at the same time. And it works out nice and evenly, so there's really no need for any pins or anything, I don't think, because if you counted your stitches and everything was correct, it should all line up nice and evenly, and you should end just about where that mesh pattern starts. And then I already fastened off, so you'll fasten off and pull your yarn through, and that's really it for the shoulder seam. You'll go ahead and repeat that on the other side. So once you're done and you've seamed your shoulders, go ahead and try on your cardigan. Keep in mind that your gauge probably will be different once you have blocked, so it might kind of loosen up a little bit, but you're going to have a pretty good idea of how your cardigan is going to fit on your shoulders. So once you're done, you're good to go for next week, and please do not forget to follow me on social media or wherever you want to follow me so that you don't miss out on next week's post. Also, if you haven't already done so, be sure to jump into the Facebook group. If you have any questions, we're in there and we're ready to answer, and we're having a good time in there. And don't forget to use the hashtag SquidCal16 whenever you're posting on social media about the crochet along. I hope you all are having fun, and so far you're liking how your cardigan is coming out. And I will see you all next week when we get to put the trim onto the front of our cardigan. Bye.